The Bermuda Triangle has captured imaginations and sparked fear for many decades. Located in the Atlantic Ocean between Miami, Bermuda, and San Juan, Puerto Rico, this stretch of ocean has become synonymous with mysterious disappearances. Over the past several decades, dozens of ships and aircraft have vanished without a trace in this area, taking hundreds of people with them. No wreckage, no bodies, no explanations. American author Charles Berlitz, in his books, described this zone as a place where the laws of nature seem to stop working. While many stories about the Bermuda Triangle remain unanswered, one event stands out particularly: the disappearance of 5 military aircraft on December 5, 1945. This story, known as the disappearance of Flight 19, became one of the Triangle's most famous mysteries. This case is unique for its mysteriousness, and the fact that many years later, researchers finally found aircraft wreckage approximately 12 miles off the coast of Florida, at a depth of 800 feet. The wreckage revealed torpedo bombers of the TBM Avenger type, which belonged to the U.S. Navy. The discovery gave hope that the mystery would finally be solved, but as we'll see, it only raised more questions. Let's return to that day when 5 aircraft set out on what should have been a routine flight, but ended as one of aviation's greatest mysteries. In 1945, the Bermuda Triangle didn't yet have the sinister reputation it would later acquire. However, even then, ships and aircraft were disappearing in this region, especially after the end of World War II. By estimates, over the 26 years leading up to that time, more than 1,000 people had perished in this zone. Most strangely, search operations rarely yielded results. No traces of accidents, no clues. This situation created an atmosphere of uncertainty that only intensified interest in this region. The disappearance of Flight 19 became a turning point, after which the Bermuda Triangle began to be perceived as something more than just a dangerous stretch of ocean. Why did this story fascinate people so much? First, an entire squadron of 5 aircraft vanished. Second, the flight took place under ideal conditions with an experienced crew who knew how to handle difficult situations. Third, even after massive search efforts, no evidence of what happened was ever found. This event became a symbol of the Bermuda Triangle's mysteriousness, and its details make us wonder what could have gone so wrong on that clear December day. Let's dive into this story to understand exactly what happened on December 5, 1945. We'll examine how this flight began, who participated in it, and what circumstances preceded the disappearance. December 5, 1945 began like any other day at Fort Lauderdale Naval Air Station in Florida. For the U.S. Navy personnel based in this region, the day started routinely. After World War II, many pilots who had undergone combat training and gained significant experience served here. Emergency situations in the air were rare, as the equipment was modern and the crews were well trained. It was under these conditions that the squadron known as Flight 19 prepared for takeoff, consisting of 5 TBM Avenger torpedo bombers. These aircraft were the pride of American aviation at the time, equipped with the latest technology. The Avengers had earned a reputation as reliable machines on the battlefields of the Pacific Ocean. Each aircraft could carry a crew of 3, had powerful engines, and could stay airborne for up to 5.5 hours with full fuel tanks. Each aircraft was equipped with a 10-channel radio system that ensured communication with ground services, as well as a radio compass that allowed pilots to determine direction under any conditions. Additionally, the aircraft were equipped with survival gear, rubber boats, and life rafts that automatically inflated upon contact with water. Each crew member had an individual life jacket, making survival chances quite high in case of an emergency. Before takeoff, all aircraft underwent thorough inspection, and mechanics found no technical problems. Everything was in perfect order. Leading the squadron was Lieutenant Charles Taylor, an experienced pilot with over 2,500 flight hours. His qualifications earned respect among colleagues, and he had a reputation as a reliable commander. The other members of Flight 19 were also highly experienced. Some even exceeded Taylor in service time or rank, demonstrating the high level of preparation of the entire team. A total of 14 airmen participated in the flight instead of the planned 15. One crew member declined to fly at the last moment, sensing some kind of premonition. This fact would later become the subject of much discussion, but at the time, no one paid it particular attention. The pilots joked around, checked equipment, and prepared for what seemed like a completely routine assignment. The mission assigned to Flight 19 appeared simple. The aircraft were to conduct a patrol assignment along Florida's eastern coast. They needed to fly 160 miles northeast toward an area known as Hen and Chicken Shoals, located north of Bimini Island, then return to base. The total flight duration was supposed to be about 2 hours. Similar training flights were performed regularly and had never caused problems before. The weather that day was favorable. The sky was clear, visibility was excellent, and flight conditions were ideal. The pilots knew the route, had accurate charts, and their aircraft were ready to perform the mission. Nothing foreboded trouble. This flight was meant to be just another routine item on Fort Lauderdale Naval Air Station's schedule. The Avengers were built for complex combat operations, so such an assignment seemed like an easy exercise. However, it's precisely this mission's simplicity that makes the subsequent events even more mysterious. How could a squadron equipped with modern technology, with an experienced crew, and under ideal weather conditions simply vanish? To understand what went so wrong, we need to move to the moment when the 5 aircraft took to the skies and began their flight. The next few hours would change everything, leaving behind only questions without answers. At 2:10 p.m. local time on December 5, 1945, 5 Grumman TBM Avenger torpedo bombers roared down the runway at Naval Air Station Fort Lauderdale and lifted into the sky. The flight began flawlessly, the aircraft gleamed with technical perfection, the weather offered crystal-clear conditions, and the crew of 14 experienced aviators led by Lieutenant Charles C. Taylor was ready to execute their mission. According to calculations, the squadron was to fly east to Hens and Chicken Shoals, then return to base. The flight was expected to last about 3 hours. Everything was proceeding according to plan, and nothing on the horizon suggested that this day would enter history as one of aviation's greatest mysteries. The first warning signal pierced the airwaves at 3:15 p.m. when the squadron was supposed to contact the control tower for landing clearance. Instead of a standard request, operators heard the voice of Charles Taylor sounding unusually agitated. "We have an emergency," he reported. "We seem to be lost. We can't see land." These words stunned the ground personnel. How could experienced pilots executing a routine mission in clear weather lose their bearings? The control center responded immediately, asking Taylor to report his exact position. The commander's response only deepened their bewilderment. "We can't determine our position. We don't know where we are. It looks like we're lost." This conversation was striking in its unexpectedness. Taylor, who had logged over 2,500 flight hours and had a reputation as an experienced pilot, sounded as if he were a novice who had forgotten the basics of navigation. Confusion reigned in the control center. Flight conditions remained ideal. Clear skies, excellent visibility, no signs of storms or other natural anomalies. The pilots had modern equipment, including radio compasses that allowed precise directional determination. Moreover, the route ran along the Florida coast, which would have been hard to miss from the air. How could the squadron lose sight of land? This question tormented the operators. Ground personnel tried to help. They transmitted a clear order: head due west. This was a logical solution, as Florida has a long coastline, and the pilots should have been able to see it physically if they flew westward. However, after this, radio contact with the squadron was lost for an extended period. The silence on the airwaves only intensified the anxiety. What was happening aboard the aircraft? Why had pilots who possessed all the necessary instruments and experience become helpless in determining their own location? These questions remained unanswered, and the situation was becoming increasingly serious. This moment became the turning point in the entire story. Taylor's report of lost orientation stunned the control center and called into question all standard procedures. How could it be that 5 aircraft, equipped with modern navigation equipment, simultaneously lost their bearings? Why had an experienced commander who knew the region and had significant flight time suddenly lost the ability to find land? These first warning signals were only the beginning of a chain of events that would make this flight legendary. The next communications from the squadron would only add to the mystery, forcing everyone who heard them to wonder what was happening in the sky over the Bermuda Triangle. After the first alarming report at 3:15 p.m., when Lieutenant Charles Taylor announced that the squadron had lost orientation, the situation in the sky over the Bermuda Triangle began to deteriorate rapidly. Radio contact with the 5 Avenger aircraft was interrupted, and tense silence descended on the Fort Lauderdale Control Center. Operators waited, hoping the pilots would reestablish contact and clarify the situation. When Taylor finally responded, his voice trembled with anxiety that bordered on panic. We don't know which way is west. Everything looks strange now, completely different. We are completely lost. Even the ocean looks unusual," he transmitted. These words only deepened the ground personnel's confusion. What did the experienced pilot mean when he said the ocean looked unusual? And why couldn't the squadron determine the direction west, where Florida should be? These messages were so extraordinary that it seemed as if the pilots had found themselves in another reality. On a clear day, when the sun was already beginning to set, determining west should have been a simple task. It would have been enough to orient themselves by the sun's position. Even if the radio compasses had failed for some reason, the pilots could have simply maintained a course toward the sun. However, from the conversations between crew members, it became clear that they couldn't see the sun at all. This was absolutely incomprehensible. How could they lose a reference point that's visible from any location in clear weather? Ground personnel remained stunned, trying to comprehend what was happening to the squadron. By 4:00 p.m., the situation had become even more critical. Taylor was obviously so disoriented that he lost the ability to effectively command the squadron. Recognizing his confusion, he transferred command authority to another pilot. This step indicated the seriousness of the situation aboard the aircraft. Taylor, who had thousands of flight hours behind him, seemed completely demoralized. The new commander established contact at 4:45 p.m. and transmitted another strange message. "We still can't determine exactly where we are. We appear to be 225 miles northeast of base. We think we're over the Gulf of Mexico." This message completely bewildered the dispatchers. The Gulf of Mexico was in the opposite direction from their route. How could the squadron have ended up so far from the planned course if the flight had lasted only a few hours? These words shocked the control center. Dispatcher Don Poole, hearing about the Gulf of Mexico, suggested that the pilots had either lost their minds or were under severe stress. The indicated location was so illogical that it seemed impossible. The squadron's route ran along Florida's eastern coast, and even if they had deviated from course, the pilots should have seen the shoreline. However, their messages indicated complete loss of spatial orientation and understanding of where they were. The ocean that looked unusual, the absence of the sun, malfunctioning compasses, all of this created a picture that didn't fit within the framework of an ordinary aviation accident. Each detail added new mysteries to an already incomprehensible situation. After the 4:45 p.m. message, contact with the squadron was lost again. This silence became a harbinger of tragedy. The pilots, who had been joking before takeoff, now seemed to be struggling with an incomprehensible situation that was disabling their instruments and their ability to make rational decisions. What could have caused such disorientation? Was it a technical malfunction, a natural phenomenon, or something else entirely? These questions remained unanswered, but one thing was clear. The squadron was in serious danger, and time for rescue was quickly running out. The next steps by ground services would prove decisive, but as we shall see, they would only add more mysteries to this story. When it became clear that the 5 Avenger aircraft of Flight 19 were in serious trouble, the command center at Fort Lauderdale immediately began preparations for a rescue operation. The messages from the squadron, which had been coming in until 4:45 p.m., indicated complete disorientation, and the final assumption that they were somewhere over the Gulf of Mexico only heightened the alarm. Ground personnel understood the critical nature of the situation. The fuel supply in the Avengers was calculated for 5.5 hours, and several hours had already passed since takeoff. A massive operation was organized to search for and rescue the pilots, covering an enormous area. The search involved 300 aircraft and 21 ships. They carefully examined every square kilometer in the region where the squadron could possibly be located. Searches were conducted both over the ocean and over land, including the Florida forests, in case the aircraft had somehow changed course and crashed on the mainland. Despite all efforts, no trace of the Avengers could be found. No wreckage, no life rafts, no signals from the pilots. The absence of any traces seemed strange since the aircraft were equipped with rubber boats and rafts that automatically inflated upon contact with water, and each pilot had a life jacket. Even in the event of a crash, there should have been some traces, but the sea and air remained silent. At this critical moment, a large seaplane, the Martin Mariner, specially designed for rescue missions, was brought into the operation. This aircraft proved ideal for such tasks. It could land on water even in stormy conditions and had a crew of 13 people ready for search and rescue. The Martin Mariner flew out to the area where signals from the squadron had last been detected to try to find the pilots. Shortly after takeoff, the seaplane transmitted several radio messages that raised even more questions. From these, it became clear that the Martin Mariner was somewhere near the missing Avengers, but the content of the messages was unusual. In particular, the radio operator mentioned strong winds at an altitude of 180 meters, which seemed strange since the meteorological conditions that day remained favorable. After these messages, contact with the Martin Mariner was suddenly lost. Operators tried to restore contact, but all attempts proved futile. The seaplane that was supposed to rescue the squadron had itself vanished without a trace. This event became another blow to the ground personnel. How could it be that an aircraft specifically designed to work in difficult conditions with an experienced crew and the ability to stay afloat even without fuel simply disappeared? The Martin Mariner had reliable radio equipment, but it transmitted no distress signal. This silence only deepened the sense of helplessness. By 7:04 p.m., the Air Traffic Control Center in Miami detected weak signals from Flight 19's call signs. This proved particularly strange since by calculations there should have been no fuel remaining in the Avengers. The signals were so weak they could barely be recognized, but they definitely belonged to the missing squadron. Who was transmitting them, and from where? This question remained unanswered. The search continued for a long time, but neither sea, nor air, nor land provided any clues. 6 aircraft, 5 Avengers, and 1 Martin Mariner, along with 27 pilots, had vanished in an area that seemed absolutely safe. This event raised new questions for everyone. What could have simultaneously disabled 2 types of aircraft with different equipment and capabilities? And why did even thorough searches yield no results? The next phase of this story, attempts to understand the causes of the disaster, would only underscore its mystery. After the disappearance of 5 Avenger aircraft and the rescue seaplane Martin Mariner on December 5, 1945 in the Bermuda Triangle area, the United States faced one of the most mysterious aviation disasters in its history. The massive search operation covered hundreds of square kilometers of ocean, airspace, and even land, but no traces were found. Wreckage, rescue equipment, or the bodies of the pilots remained unknown. Particularly strange was the complete absence of any remains, since the Avengers could remain afloat even after fuel exhaustion, and the Martin Mariner was designed to stay on water for practically unlimited time. All 27 pilots had undergone survival training in extreme conditions and had special equipment, making their chances of rescue quite high. Yet the sea remained silent, and this silence demanded explanations. To investigate the causes of the disaster, the United States created a special commission. Its task was to establish the fate of Flight 19 and the Martin Mariner, as well as to try to understand why similar incidents in the Bermuda Triangle area remained without answers. The commission carefully analyzed all available data, radio conversations, meteorological reports, aircraft technical specifications, and ground personnel testimony. None of the versions considered could fully explain the event. The weather that day was clear, with no signs of storms or magnetic anomalies that could have affected the navigation equipment. The aircraft had undergone inspection before takeoff, and their radio compasses, radio stations, and other systems worked flawlessly. Theoretically, even in case of technical failure, the pilots should have transmitted a distress signal, but none of the 6 aircraft ever did so. One of the key questions was the pilots' loss of orientation, so complete that they were unable to find the western direction. On a clear day, the setting sun should have been an obvious landmark, but the crew claimed they couldn't see it. Even more puzzling was the report that the ocean looked strange. What could this mean? Did the pilots encounter some anomaly that changed their perception of the surrounding environment? The commission also tried to explain why the radio compasses, which were considered reliable, proved powerless to help the pilots return to base. None of the hypotheses, from magnetic storms to sudden weather changes, could be confirmed by evidence. Another question concerned the weak call signs from Flight 19, detected at 7:04 p.m. by the Miami Air Traffic Control Center. These signals arrived 2 hours after the fuel in the Avengers should have run out, according to calculations. Who was transmitting them, and how was this possible if the aircraft could no longer be in the air? This detail only added to the mystery. Regarding the Martin Mariner, its disappearance was no less strange. The last message about strong winds at 180 meters altitude contradicted the meteorological conditions of that day, and the commission could find no explanation for this fact. The investigation lasted a long time, but the commission completed its work without clear conclusions. No version, whether technical failure, human error, or natural phenomenon, could explain all aspects of this tragedy. One commission member, losing patience, even jokingly suggested that the pilots had flown off to Mars. This statement, though humorous, reflected the level of confusion faced by the experts. The disappearance of 6 aircraft with 27 pilots in an area that seemed absolutely safe left more questions than answers. Why did the ocean seem strange? Why couldn't the pilot see the sun? Why did the compasses refuse to work? And who transmitted the final call signs? These questions became the basis for numerous theories that we will examine in the next part, but one thing was clear. This event forever changed the perception of the Bermuda Triangle. The disappearance of 5 Avenger aircraft and the rescue seaplane Martin Mariner on December 5, 1945, forever cemented the Bermuda Triangle's reputation as a zone where people and machines vanish without a trace. A special commission in the United States conducted a thorough investigation, but was never able to provide a clear answer to what happened to Flight 19 and its would-be rescuers. The absence of wreckage, bodies, or any material evidence only strengthened the feeling that this catastrophe went beyond an ordinary aviation incident. This event became a symbol of an unsolved mystery, inspiring countless theories and speculations. Though none of these have ever been proven, it's precisely these questions and attempts to explain them that transform the story of Flight 19 into legend. The most astonishing aspect of this story remains how quickly and without a trace, 6 aircraft with 27 crew members disappeared. The Avengers were designed to stay afloat even after running out of fuel, while the Martin Mariner could remain on water for practically unlimited time. Moreover, the pilots had received survival training for extreme conditions and carried rescue equipment. This made their complete disappearance even more incomprehensible. Why was not a single life raft or life vest ever found? Why did none of the aircraft, equipped with reliable radio equipment, ever transmit a distress signal? These questions became the foundation for speculation about what might have happened in the skies over the Bermuda Triangle. The pilot's words about the ocean looking strange remained a puzzle. This phrase, transmitted by Charles Taylor, sounded like something more than ordinary disorientation. It made people wonder, could the pilots have encountered some anomaly that altered their perception? For instance, could some natural phenomenon, perhaps an optical illusion or unusual weather conditions, have created the impression that the ocean looked different? Or was it something that defied logical explanation? The absence of the sun on a clear day, which the pilots also reported, only added more questions. How could experienced aviators lose such an obvious landmark? The malfunction of the radio compasses became yet another detail that troubled investigators. These instruments were considered reliable and should have helped the pilots find the correct course, even if they had deviated from their route. However, the squadron claimed they couldn't determine which way was west. Could a magnetic anomaly in the Bermuda Triangle area have disabled the compasses? Meteorological reports recorded nothing unusual, but this hypothesis remained one of the few that could at least partially explain the loss of orientation. However, it didn't answer why the pilots didn't use the sun as a reference point and why their transmissions became increasingly chaotic. The final radio calls from Flight 19, recorded at 7:04 p.m., added even more mystery. By calculations, fuel in the Avengers should have run out much earlier, so who was transmitting these signals and from where? This could indicate that at least one aircraft remained operational, or that someone among the pilots was still trying to establish contact. But why were the signals so weak, and why did they stop? This detail became one of the most intriguing for researchers, as it suggested that the squadron might have remained in some incomprehensible state longer than calculations predicted. The joke by one commission member that the pilots had flown off to Mars, though said in despair, reflected the general helplessness in the face of this puzzle. This phrase became a symbol of how far from logical explanation the events of that day were. The disappearance of Flight 19 and the Martin Mariner left behind a series of unanswered questions. What caused the pilots to lose their bearings? Why did the ocean seem strange to them? Why didn't the compasses work? And why were no traces ever found? This story became the foundation for many theories about the Bermuda Triangle, from natural anomalies to fantastic assumptions. Even decades later, when wreckage from Avengers was finally found at a depth of 250 meters off the Florida coast, there weren't any more answers. This event remains one of aviation's greatest mysteries, reminding us that some puzzles of nature, or perhaps something beyond it, still remain beyond our understanding.